guest this afternoon needs no introduction, but I will take this opportunity to introduce Mr. Lang Walker AO. He's the Executive Chairman and founder of Walker Corporation, one of the largest private property developers in Australia. Having lived and breathed the property development industry for over 50 years, you've delivered over 1,000 projects, which include national landmark destinations, and you've come out of 2, maybe 3 possible recessions on top. Your passion, enthusiasm and natural intuition for property development is undeniable. With a reputation for tackling projects that others simply won't, your legacy will only be matched by the size of your vision. Awarded the Officer of the Order of Australia for his varied and continual philanthropic efforts within the community, Lang is truly an icon of the industry and undisputed city shaper. Would you please welcome Lang Walker to the stage?
Thank you, Adam. That's a pretty good wrap. Thank you very much.
No problems.
I think I might need some of the Gabriel products in a couple more years' time, after being nearly 55 years in the property industry, and I think the WeWork guy, he might need a job in a couple of weeks, so we might be able to
there you
help
go.
him out now.
Shots fired. You'll get a right of reply, maybe in the press. Now, Lang, as I said, you've delivered over 1,000 projects, 5 decades in this industry. You're extraordinarily experienced, but I did read that you've got one very peculiar habit or preference. You like your toast burnt. What's that all about?
I don't know where that came from. I think probably the chef on my boat or the island in Fiji, and I've tackled some pretty interesting things, but I've got to tell you, doing a luxury island in Fiji was probably about the most difficult thing I've ever done. And somehow that's come out that I love cold burnt toast with Vegemite and a good old Aussie.
That's about as Australian as you get, Tim. Do you like that, mate? That is about as Aussie as you get. Now, Lang, there's a lot of people in this room here that have certainly heard of you and certainly looked up to what your business and what you've been able to achieve in this industry and in your life. Give us a sense of who you are as a kid first. I'm really interested to understand what those early years were like, how you were inspired, what things you looked towards, what kind of attitudes, what kind of personality did you have?
Ooh, that's how long have you got, guys? But I guess as a kid I was always very entrepreneurial, always looking for opportunities, and probably one of the first opportunities, and I learned quite a lot out of those early years. Probably the first one was an education in learning how things can change very quickly. As a young kid, I had a billy cart built by my father, which wasn't a little racy one like normal kids. It had sides on it like one of those Boral triaxle trailers, and the local bakery, they were delivering all their bread in horse and cart. And so I went up, talked myself into a job, brought the billy cart up and said that I would come and shovel all the horse manure. I got myself a job of getting up there at 5 o'clock in the morning on Saturday morning and Sunday morning, and going around and selling it for $5 a load. And that was pretty lucrative. And then I got a job as a telegram boy, so I could go around and visit all the customers on a six weekly basis, just to say, well, and this was down in the Sutherland Shire where there wasn't a lot of fertile soil, there's a lot of sandstone, and they needed manure and everything. So I started a callback sheet, and every 6 weeks I'd be, the telegram boy knocking on their door saying, how's your garden going? So anyway, that went for probably about 9 months, and anyway, I went to the bakery one Saturday morning and it was closed. And anyway, they said, oh no, the bakery's closed and we're going to be using trucks now to deliver the bread. And I thought, okay, so things have changed pretty quickly. They forgot to tell me. And then bloody developers came along and they bought the bakery and turned it into apartments. So I thought, now there's something that's happened very quickly, and that was life-changing for my big investment in the mobility cart.
And you've been getting them back for 50 years.
Well, I did buy this, my private school, not my private school, my school, when my headmaster told my father that I'd never amount to anything. So I bought the school and turned that into villas and apartments.
Now, there is some water there, mate, I know.
But I guess the other...
So you're a naughty kid.
No, I was sort of very, very entrepreneurial. One of the other, yes, interesting things, Woolooware Golf Club, they were advertising for a ranger to go down and get all these ruffians off the course that used to come on the course and knock off all the balls. And so I got myself a job. I had the brand new push bike, and anyway, I accepted the jobs, and part of the job spec was I got to sell all the balls back to the pro at the end of a weekend. And day one, I drove around and I looked at all these kids that I was supposed to throw off the course. That wasn't a very good decision, taking that job, because the north end, it's where the sharks are in that area, in Caringbah, which is a pretty rough end of town. So I drove around, I went home that night and I thought, how am I going to handle this? And so I went down, I thought, well, I've got to tackle this head on. So I said to the guys, oh, and I got a big thing that said Ranger, that gave me lots of authority, they thought. And so I went and said to them, we've got to have a meeting. And they said, yeah, what do you want to talk about? And I said, listen, I can ring the police, get you taken off the course, we'll do this. So what about we do something totally different? We'll all work together, and you've got hole 1, you've got hole 3, do that, and I will pay you cash for all the golf balls. I set the rules in place. Anyway, I had the whole scope set out and the discipline for the kids, and actually it worked quite well. And after about 4 weeks, I started to buy them those little ball suction things on the end of a stick, and so I was getting more balls, and every day this is where I learned a little bit about value adding. On Sunday afternoon I'd go to the pro and I'd say, well, that ball's worth $1, and he'd say, I'll give you threepence, and you know, that's my age, it's threepence and sixpences. And so probably half of the balls I sold and I got the cash, the other half I went home, and my bedroom at the time had a K-night ceiling, and that's very, very soft. So I had about 50 to 100 balls every week just hanging up, and I would respray them, I'd file the edges off them, and I knew by Thursday afternoon, Friday, he'd be short of balls for the weekend. So I'd go down there Friday afternoon after school, and we'd do a renegotiation. And I did get my prices, but it did tell me a little bit and taught me a lot about value adding and doing some difficult things. But I guess that was probably the first franchising that came to Australia.
So, like,
when I just franchised out each hole.
Why were you doing that? Was life pretty tough, or was there just a burning desire in you to create?
To do stuff.
Yeah, to do stuff.
And there was long-term examples and also short-term examples, and there was a short-term example where Woolies had opened at Caringbah, and all the kids at the school would go down there, and with all these open displays, they'd knock off sunglasses, fountain pens, and do all of the stuff, go back to school, sell them to the kids at the school. Look, I've just got this. And so I thought, there's going to be a big bust. And don't know how long it's going to take, but won't be good that there's a short-term opportunity. So I went and bought all the things that the kids were interested. I got the receipts, I stapled them into the inside of my coat, and I knew I would need them at some point. And I did. The Cronulla detectives arrived at school, and all the kids were lined up, And being W, I was sort of at the end of the queue, and when I got there, the detective and the headmaster, they were sitting there and they said, well, you've been selling stuff to the kids, stolen goods. And I said, no. Anyway, long story short, I pulled out all my receipts and I put them out on the desk, and the headmaster looked at the head detective and he said, this guy's, he's beaten you again, because I was running the marble gambling behind the toilets. So I had probably 6 jobs at any one time, and I enjoyed them all.
Loved it. Now, you went into business with your father.
Correct.
In an earth moving company. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes.
And maybe tell us a little bit about your father as well.
Well, he was a complete hilarious guy. He lived to 102. He loved to drink. Great sense of humour. Couldn't kill him with a brown stick. He was a danger to shipping. Everything about my father was quite mad. And when we started, as soon as I wanted to start expanding, he wanted to retire. And which we had quarries in Sydney, and I'd sort of expanded that part of it, and he just didn't want to. An old Scotsman, he didn't want to take on any risk or any sort of growth in the company. And with the quarries, I wanted to get bigger crushers and get the production up. And that was the time of the Whitlam era, and they were spending a lot of money in road base, and it was called the Red Scheme at the time in Sydney, where they were building new roads. And anyway, I think we were working our quarry at 24/7 just to keep up the demand. In 73, I think we were selling 12 to 13,000 tonne of road base a day out of our quarry. We just could hardly keep up, and I wanted to keep buying, machines that could actually produce it more cost effectively. So he wanted to retire, and I sort of found a public company to take his half, a big trucking company, and being me private and them public, and me a bit mad and a bit entrepreneurial, that partnership didn't go all that well. So I sold out, and I put my effort then into property.
Yeah. So what was your first property development, your first proper intentional project?
Well, that was very interesting, because I didn't have to write too many checks. There was a company called Parks Development, and all you people are probably too young to know about them, back in the 70s. And they were subdividing all this land in the Sutherland Shire, and they had no concept of marketing, they had no concept of presentation, and their range of blocks, the cheapest ones were, I think, about $150. I think it was $150, or no, it wasn't 150,000, must have been dollars. And the most expensive was $450. So I would go and buy on 3 months' terms all the rough ones, and really there was no difference. They were all good blocks, but they hadn't presented them. So I would go 3 months settlement, and I would buy 4 or 5 blocks on a Saturday. I would sort of put earth moving equipment in for a couple of days, straightening them out, putting a driveway, putting some landscaping, presenting them, doing a building platform, working out where the sun was going to come from, painting on the blocks, the sun, a lot of the things that people didn't really think about in those days. And on Thursday, I'd give it an ad in the Herald again, and put them on for the same price as the Parks Development's bigger blocks. They're good blocks. And I would have every one of those sold by the time the 3 months had come around. We'd sold them, and I was doing simultaneous settlements with Parks with the purchasers. Yeah. So that was probably...
Were you driving the trucks and painting the lines yourself? Were you No. So you had contractors that were there doing
None
it?
of
You
all
were just-
our machinery and
machinery,
and
yeah.
people, yeah.
Yeah, but you're conducting the works that were happening at that point in
But
time.
it was 2 days' work, and Parks Developments just never thought of the presentation.
Of that. So how long were you doing that, and then how long did it take for you to go from that to your first building?
Well, Parks Developments, after about 18 months, they worked out who was the bloke that was buying all of the land. So they asked me to come in, and they couldn't work out how could you do this? And I said, well, it's not that hard. And so in our civil engineering business that we had at the time, they started giving us contracts to do and present a lot of their estates around Sydney. Cut a long story short, they started running out of money, and at that time, the land wasn't selling, but house and land was, and they could only pay me in land. So I ended up with 50 or 60 blocks in lieu of the contracting, and I'm now left with the land, not a lot of cash flow, and luckily the Whitlam government was spending a lot of money with our quarrying company, and that gave us the cash flow to be able to sustain that. So the first 5 blocks, we engaged the best architects in Sydney, best landscapers, interior designers, and we started with 5 houses that we built. They were sold instantly, that they were finished, and then I moved through the rest of the blocks until I was then out of all those blocks.
And then you're away. You had a balance sheet, and you were able to.
Well, I didn't have much of a balance sheet,
but you're able.
I didn't go broke.
Yeah. So, in the interest of time, we're going to have to fast forward a little bit because, and we'll take us to the first recession that you saw, and how you're able to sort of pivot your way around that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, that was probably around about the early 80s. And my first project in Queensland was at Coolum. And I did sort of 2, silly things. One was Coolum, a lot of pre-sales. Pole houses were the name of the game on the big mountain around Coolum. And my project manager there, was sucking up to me, so he called Lang Street, the top of the highest stage, Lang Street, and after torrential rain, just after Christmas, stage 1 Lang Street went into stage 2, stage 1 and 2 went into stage 3 down the hill, stage 4 went into stage 5, and it was a complete disaster. And I ended up going up there with my wife, and she'd stay at Noosa, and I was down in one of those rental cars with all the bunting, trying to sell blocks of land after all the pre-sales that we had from Melbourne investors all fell over. And then I guess that was the first recession. We had a couple of other, my first multi-story, which was 8 stories, and I got everything wrong. Again, all the pre-sales fell over. My partner went broke, the builder went broke. I was paying $57,000 a month in interest, and the apartments were too small, and we had to work out of that. So I learned a little bit about what not to do.
Well, you got a bit of a reputation as being the person that can pick the market. There's not a lot of people out there. I mean, for those that don't know, you sort of sold out before I think Keating's recession we had to have, and then and before the GFC, very famously sold almost everything again and cashed up and moved into recession periods with cash and able to make the most of it and build from there. What do you look for? Like, how did you know, not just once but twice and then 3 times, that it was time to cash out and it was time to wait for it to tip over?
I don't think it's rocket science in our industry. there's a few indicators. You get a lot of apprentice developers come in, they pay too much, doctors start becoming developers.
We'd like to welcome all the doctors here today as well. I think there's one down here, Johnny Harmon, you're speaking tomorrow. Very successful though.
I'm talking generally. But it's, and interest rates generally, they're going through the roof, and we were developing in the 70s and 80s with 23% construction finance, and that was all factored into your feasibilities. But it's just probably there's about 5 or 6 little indicators that you can get. You could just see in the 2008 recession, just things weren't going right. The states, the markets, there's just probably just gut feel things that you know that you'd be better off with a pile of cash, and you mightn't be picking the bottom of the market, you mightn't pick it exactly right, but if you're in a cashed up position, moving into a bad time, you're going to be able to buy stuff that's. You make your money when you buy. Actually,
I think you've swerved that question beautifully, and if I knew the answer like you do, I probably wouldn't share it either with everyone else. But look, it's fundamentals, I guess. So tell us about some of the iconic moments, or the big moments in your life, in your career, whether they be projects or specific moments. Can you just share with us maybe one or two?
You're trying to cut me off now, eh? But look, I think there was a lot of probably mundane properties and developments that we did over the years, but probably it started to change significantly for me. And Andy Hoyne was up here before talking about placemaking, and to me, one of the big things that changed my direction is I love anything with a complexity level that's sort of high, and it really your competition does thin out in there. I love the bigger projects and a degree of difficulty, as I said, and probably the first one that came along in the mid-90s that was you could not have got much higher in complexity was the Finger Wharf in Woolloomooloo in Sydney. A couple of developers had gone broke. I think the government of the day and Paul Keating wanted to knock it down, and it was to me a challenge. And the government, we won the tender with the government, and it wasn't getting a lot of money up front, but it was how do we get the thing moving? And there were I think about 5 key ingredients that you needed to do to that project to make it profitable. And from piling to heritage to putting in retail strips, the restaurant strips along there, they're still iconic today. But it was and the marinas, but it was a placemaking exercise for Sydney, and for 20 years it's still iconic. That led to King Street Wharf, that we did that, and it really brought in this level of mixed use where people and places, the restaurants and hotels at the Finger Wharf. We did the same down at King Street Wharf, where what's up above is, whether it's commercial or residential, the real key factor is what's on the ground plane, and what does that ground floor space look like, and how activated can you make it? So they were 2 very successful projects that led into probably the biggest, the most contaminated site in Australia was Rhodes Peninsula. We took that on board. I went to Sweden. We signed up IKEA. We bolted to an IKEA into a conventional shopping centre. Put in commercial, 50,000 metres of commercial. We'd done a lot of commercial on the other side of the railway line. And then we went through and So that was iconic, but that was placemaking, and that is, if you saw the photos of what it was like, a lot of people thought I was mad when I'd tackled that, but what it looked like when we first started to what it looks like today. I think that then led us to the Broadway shopping centre, and that was a very high-profile shopping area in Sydney near the Sydney University and UTS, a very strong growth area. We started Uni Lodge in Australia. We did one of the buildings and converted that to 660 commercial student units, and then we did the shopping centre. Again, that was, got a lot of criticism from the industry that wouldn't work, it was in the wrong place. But, we'd done enough work to know that would be a strong growth area.
So Lang, of all those projects that you've done, and you mentioned a lot there that are just incredibly noteworthy, do you have kind of favourite projects or favourite experiences, or are they a bit like children where you can't sort of differentiate?
Well, some of them you have...
Well, it depends. Some people might differentiate their kids. No, I know my parents do. I'm down the bottom of the pack.
But look, I've been told I should write a book, and I really need to find somebody that's got a wicked sense of humour to write the book, because some of the problems we've had with planning, with governments, with environmentalists, all the people we've had to deal with. The reality is, in our business today, everything's got to be sustainable. If you're going to lease it, you're going to sell it, and some of that's gone to a ridiculous stage. But I think probably, there's a lot of them that would the projects. Collins Square, we started that, and there was tumbleweed on the site, and we're trying to get tenants from the Paris end of Melbourne to come down to we called it, that was Docklands, and we banned that name, and we called it the New York end. And the number of lunches and the drinks and the things that we had to do, we ran all these restaurants that we were losing money out of, but just to create the place. And and we did the same at the Finger Wolf. I owned and ran a lot of the restaurants for quite a while until they were established. And now you look at Collins Square, it's probably, it's fully leased. It's one of the largest commercial projects in Australia, one of three, 250,000 metres, and we still own it. It's worth about 3.2 billion. And when you look at the photos from the beginning and seeing what it is today, we have 35,000 people work and eat. We've got 47 food outlets in there in an office complex. I guess the other one that's exciting, I looked at Parramatta for many years, wanted to get involved, but it was too early in Parramatta. 3 years ago, when the government was starting to get all the infrastructure delivered out there with the airport, light rail, upgrading of the heavy rail, it was time to tackle Parramatta while everyone thought it was still no man's territory. We got in there, and we've created another unbelievable complex where we're producing office buildings at the quality of Barangaroo and Collins Square at half the rent, a third of the rent that they're paying in the city. But it's linked into the infrastructure of heavy and light rail network.
Now, I know we could talk about projects for a very long time. You mean you've done so many that I think we could stay here all night. But I am interested in tapping into a couple of things as well. Lang, you ventured offshore in the late 2000s with a project in Malaysia. Can you tell us about why you sort of went abroad and sort of what motivated that, and why Malaysia?
Very, very good question. Why Malaysia? First of all, we had an association with the Kwok family. They're the owners of the Shangri-La group, and they were our first original partner in Collins Square. and they, when the GFC came along, they pulled out. We took their share, and they also moved out of Johor Bahru. And you've heard me mention infrastructure a few times, and I went to, all our projects are based around infrastructure. Johor Bahru is really right next to Singapore. Singapore is probably the most expensive real estate in the world, and we have now 40,000 dwellings in Johor Bahru. Both governments, Singapore and the Malaysian government, were pouring billions into infrastructure, linking up fast rail networks, major highways to link the two. There's 300,000 people a day that live in Johor Bahru that work in Singapore, and really the price differential is quite staggering. So we now have 3 projects there and 40,000 dwellings. We've got one waterfront project, that's 16,000 dwellings. That's been going for 10 years. We've got a marina. Again, we've come back to restaurants, the restaurant precinct, placemaking, a combination of high-rise, low-rise projects, product. That's 6 minutes from the causeway. Have another one that's about 8 minutes from the second crossing. We purchased 2 golf courses, and we're sort of reducing those down to a different product on the other side of the causeway. And then the other project is more a mid-range project, and there's around about 12,000 dwellings in that.
Do the numbers still smack you in the face sometimes? Is it, or you knock you off your chair? You think about these numbers, they're so large. You mentioned.
My CFO tells me that.
Does it still affect you? Does it still surprise you how big these things are getting now, or is it now just
no,
normal?
Every time I go to Malaysia, we've found something else to do, so
yeah.
we've got to stop soon and continue. No, but it's I don't know. We've built up our balance sheet. That's very strong these days. But we've got a very good team. It's not me. There's in Singapore and Malaysia, we've got 80 people in our office there. We've got a team of fabulous people in Australia and Sydney, Queensland, Melbourne, Adelaide, that have been with me probably 20 years. So
I noticed that. I mean, meeting a lot of your staff, there's a lot of people that have been there a long time.
They like to see me go away on holidays a bit.
So speaking of holidays, tell us about Kokomo. You've got an island. I mean, one of the interesting things as you're talking there, you're talking about the fact that you've been very much infrastructure-led. Where there's infrastructure being laid down, I might chase that and be first to move and take advantage of it, whereas a Fiji island, I'm not sure how much infrastructure's there.
My wife said to me, why do we need an island in Fiji? And I think she was right. But
they usually are.
It was, again, a challenge. And a friend of mine said, hey, listen, I've found this great island over there. If anyone can fix it, you can fix it. And I thought, I better not go and have a look at this for a while. He was throwing out a challenge because it was started by the Armin Resort, and they sort of got to foundation stage and a couple of structures. But anyway, about 12 months, 18 months later, I went and had a look, and it had been mothballed since the 2006 coup. And I went to the island and I looked at it and I thought, I could do something here. I could really turn this into. Anyway, cut a long story short, the security guard that was there from the bank said you could only get reception, because I asked him, who do I talk to at the bank? He said, you've got to go down that end of the beach to get reception. And I was sort of half hoping that I wouldn't get reception, and I would get reception. I was mixed feeling, because I've got my wife nagging, saying, why do we need an island in Fiji? In one ear, and me thinking this would be a great challenge on the other side. And I have holiday projects also. We build about 14 luxury houses in Aspen while I was on holidays each year. They were high end, so I'd finish those, we sold the last of those for 25 million. And then I thought, well, the Fiji project, that could do as a holiday project. And anyway, the guy answered the phone from the bank, and you thought he'd found his long-lost son. And anyway, cut a long story short, I met them in Suva the following day. Took a long time to negotiate, but the cheapest thing was buying the island, and that cost 2.8 million. And I thought I could absolutely knock this dead in about 18 months, and it would cost 10 million. Anyway, talking about the most difficult thing that I've done, it took 6 years and $110 million. I now own 2 barges, I now own 2 helicopters, 2 twin-engine seaplanes. We've got 300 staff on the island. I have never run a resort in my life before. And
have you given your wife the win?
Well, I've got her on the design team, so she now likes the island in Fiji, and our 10 grandkids love it too. So that was how Fiji came about, and I suppose that's right up there in the degree of difficulty.
Now we've only got a few minutes left, mate, and I just want to tap into Lang the man in terms of what motivates you to do what you do, to still do what you do, and I might just start with not necessarily what you've got, but what makes you different. What makes you different to most?
Well, that's a toughie. I guess I'm driven, and I sort of I try to have a balance in my life, and I race yachts and did that for 15 years competitively all around the world, while still running a business. My wife was on the crew. I guess the other thing, the last 2 years, I've got a sailboat in Europe, and I've spent 4.5 months on that in the last 2 years. Each year we do about 6,500 miles around Europe. So what I really like is the balance, and most of my team are very happy when I'm away, and it gives them a break for 12 hours when I'm not on the phone or emails. But I guess all of the fun things I like are around water. And if you have a look at a lot of our projects that we've developed over the years, they're water-centric. And the same with Malaysia, where we're reclaiming 160 acres in the Straits of Johor at the moment. So, love water, very driven. Also try and have a balance with work and holidays and family. So, just trying to keep a bit of a balance.
And what sort of advice do you give to your grandkids about the world as it's evolving, particularly, just in terms of character, but then also on the flip side of that, in terms of the way that our cities are evolving as well?
Well, we've got a big range there, from 18 down to 3 weeks. So the 3-week one's not listening to me at the moment.
And agreeing.
And humility is the thing that I talk about with my 18 and 17-year-old grandkids, and that's the important thing.
Yeah. What about the future of our cities? You've had such a big impact on them.
Oh, how much time have you got?
We'll keep it tight.
Can I keep it tight? Look, one of the biggest things is the authorities, the planning, and I know there's been a lot on planning here. In all states, Victoria does it the best in terms of planning. They just roll things out. They've got a vision, they stick to it. And there are just so much complication in planning that's not necessary. In New South Wales, which is probably the worst, they've got 11,000 people in their planning. Well, it's about 3 things. and they just got rid of their chief town planner, who was a Queenslander and done a very good job up here. They're making him redundant, and you know, it's sort of 11,000 people. You can't actually get anything done. So the cities are going to suffer, and governments really have to try and simplify the whole system. They say they're going to look at the planning legislation. That's not the problem. The legislation is the problem. It's sort of is looking at longer term vision, and very few of them have that.
So what about it, what inspires you to get out of bed every morning and do what you do?
I've got a lot of debt.
Where do you find inspiration? I mean, obviously the water's something, but the balance sheet's another thing. But what about things, influences out there, whether it be design or food or anything else that sort of inspires you, makes you tick? Anything there?
We bid on this precinct here, and I was very pissed off that we missed out. But they've done a very good job.
You think they've done a good job?
Yeah. They have. But I guess, you know, tackling new things, that's what new and innovative thinking in spaces and placemaking, that's what I enjoy most.
Awesome. Well, Lang, you don't know this, but I made a request to your public relations team for you to come join us at Urbanity this year, and they said, unfortunately, Lang's away. And it was only because I bumped in at the traffic lights to Kelly and down on James Street, and she said, "Oh, fantastic first release of Urbanity." And I said, "Yeah, Jesus, it's a real pain that Lang's not able to make it." And she goes, "Well, we should ask him." And so I believe that they asked you, and it was as a result of your team having actually subscribed and read The Urban Developer that they made the recommendation to you. So I just really want to say thank you to you, but also thank you to your team for endorsing what we do, and for you for taking the time to share your journey with us. I know that a lot of us here certainly look up to what you've been able to do in your career, but also in terms of what your legacy holds for the rest of our cities around the country. So we really thank you very deeply, and would you please thank Mr. Lang Walker.
Thank you.
Now, we don't have time for questions, unfortunately. As you know, and I'm sure you've experienced in your 50 years of development, sometimes programs go over and sometimes there's delays. So we are a little bit late today. We really do encourage everyone to join us for some drinks outside at Felons. Just before we do wrap up, I will hand over to Tim Ross for the final word. But would you please thank me one more time, Mr. Lang Walker.
Thank you very much.